Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. Kevin Hicks here with EarthWorks, and we've got another EarthWorks podcast. I'm thrilled to have my friend Dean Pillar on from Cordova Bay Golf Course up in beautiful Victoria, BC, on the island. And he has been there for 34 years as the golf course superintendent. Dean, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Kevin. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so we're going to get into a bunch of stuff, but 34 years at the same golf course. It's pretty amazing. And it's not just you, is it? It's the whole leadership team has been there for a long, long time, right?
Yeah, we started with four on the leadership team: the pro, the manager, the chef, and myself, the superintendent. We've since had the manager and the chef retire last year. So Jim Goddard, our pro, and myself are the remaining originals. But yeah, the team stayed together for 33 years. And the reason being just the ownership just puts every penny back into the golf course, wants to see continuous improvement,
right? And
puts his money where his mouth is. So it's a pleasure. They hire you and they let you do your job, and it's wonderful.
So the owner's a single owner?
No, there's a couple of owners. It's the Jall family, and then Terry
Okay.
Johnson's the other owner, and they've done a lot of business even prior to building the golf course, and just wonderful people to work for.
So this is kind of an aside to other ventures that they have.
Yes, yeah, they're developers first and foremost, and this is, I think, their favorite project.
Yeah, well, and if they've hung around this long, I would imagine it is. And every time I visit you say the same thing, that the support is always there, and you can see it in the facilities, and how you do your job. So that's a pretty rare thing these days. There's not a lot of places that not only can claim that kind of tenure, but also back it up with the resources and the support that you need to actually pull that off. So it's just a great feeling to be on your property every time I'm there, because there's places that you can feel the anxiety and the tension, and there's places where you can feel that it's running on all cylinders, and that's definitely your facility, without question. So a lot of us maybe get a little stagnant, or if you're around a property too long, you maybe get a little bit bored and complacent. I've never seen that in you. You're constantly pushing forward. What's the key to that for you?
Well, I think it's just part of my nature to be very forward thinking and continually challenged. And because of the support of the owner, if one of my staff or myself comes up with an idea, or the pro, we call them a course tour meeting. We usually do one in spring and fall. Okay. In fact, we had one about a month ago. Took an hour to do the tour with our two pros and our owner Moni and myself. Came up with a bunch of great ideas. I approved $100,000 budget that afternoon, and the work was done in 10 days. No committee meetings, no board meetings, and all the work is done, and it looks fantastic. And I feel fortunate to be on a property since its infancy. I seeded the golf course. That was the first thing I did when I moved to the island in September long weekend, and just watching it grow. One of my favorite things is going to golf courses, older golf courses that are 100+ years old. Hamilton would be an example of that. The California Golf Club would be another one. And you go there and you see how that property is nurtured to maturity, and it's inspiring to me. And I've got a chance to pass this on one day, and hopefully to somebody that continue that. But it's really neat to start at the beginning and call it your baby, and work towards a grander vision.
So is that kind of the normal protocol? Is you have a couple meetings a year with the ownership and go over, so you're not necessarily working off a master plan, but you have an opportunity to have an audience with the owners periodically? Or do you typically call those?
We don't actually have a membership per se. We have a membership, but they still pay for every green fee every time they play.
Okay.
They just have some member privileges, booking tee times in advance of the public and a few other things, which is a really good formula.
Right.
The first year of COVID, we were 200 rounds short of 90,000 rounds.
Amazing.
So, you know, it's a popular property. It's easy walking. It's flat. It's got lots of beautiful water courses and ponds. It's got a 60-acre forest in the middle, which attracts a lot of different birds, and we're close to the ocean. So it sets itself up well. We do a member survey every year because their input is extremely important.
Sure.
And one of the things we did when we closed for 5 weeks when when the world first shut down with COVID, and you know, a lot of people just ceased to operate. And we had a meeting with the ownership, and we said, you know, very rarely can we close a golf course and do aggressive tee building, aggressive aeration protocols. So we worked, I would say, almost even overtime through that 5 weeks. We were close. And was that ever fun to see the look on people's faces when they you know, came back after 5 weeks and saw, you know, half a dozen new tee boxes built, all the aeration was done. You know, it really set us up. So again, that's just the vision of the ownership to, you know, they spent money when the future was uncertain.
Right.
You know, and I'll never forget the first meeting we had with the ownership. They basically said, we had a management meeting via Zoom, and you know, they said, you've been loyal to us for 30 years, and now it's time for us to return that loyalty. So they said, don't worry about paychecks or anything, we'll stand behind you. So that was, you know, another example of
outstanding
how great our ownership is.
That's like I said earlier, that's a pretty rare thing these days. It seems like loyalty, especially in the superintendent realm, is a fleeting thing these days. And I just attended a friend of mine's retirement party. He'd been at his current golf course for the last, I think, 18 years, but he's been in the industry a long, long time and given back so much to golf and GCSAA. And you know, I told him after, or as I was leaving, that there's nothing I celebrate more as I get a little bit older too than somebody who retires of his own decision making, and you know, he's lived a good life and given to the community of golf, and then decided on his own, okay, it's time for me to hang up. And I just I think it's the fact that I'm getting a little closer to that myself that I kind of look at it that way. And you know, it doesn't happen very often. My good friend Rick Tegmeyer's retiring at the end of this month. I think you probably know Rick, and
yeah,
you know, that's another one that's just deserving of celebration if he's because of all the things that he's done for the industry and all the people he's mentored too. You know, and I'm sure you can say the same thing about the folks that have come and gone in your operation.
That's one of the things I enjoy most about the job, and especially these young people today. They're just so bright and eager to learn, and you know, it's I think the future. I'm probably more optimistic about most people when it comes to the future of maintenance staff. I think there's a lot of young, bright minds finding this career, and it's, you know, working outdoors and with Mother Nature and all the other things that go with it, building a team. You know, it's a great thing, and I'm seeing a lot of positive people entering the industry.
How do you think it'll be different in the next generation of superintendents? Because you know, we're similar age, and I mean, the reality is we came into it in a time where, you know, the philosophy was you worked your butt off, and you worked a lot of hours. And I think that's one thing I see that's different. I mean, is that something you've been able to adapt to, or they kind of see the program the way you run it?
Well, it took a while for me to buy into work-life balance. The reason being, I grew up in the prairies in Alberta, and you literally earned your keep, so to speak, in about a 7-month period. So, and you know, at a member club too, a lot of the members may only play on weekends. They would drive up from Calgary. I was the superintendent at Carstairs at the time. And so they want to see you there on the weekends. Otherwise they say, you know, where's the superintendent? So, and that was okay, because I had the, you know, I was still going into work in the winter times because you feel obligated, but it was pretty casual.
Sure.
And when I moved out to Victoria, it took me several years to get that balance, because it is more of a year-round job. And so I would say, you know, very rarely myself or any of my assistants or any of the staff for that matter work more than a 42-hour work week max. I schedule most people for 38 hours and
Okay.
encourage a couple weeks off in the summertime because it is a year-round season. And so it's I think the biggest thing now is moving forward. I think, and hopefully superintendents are mentoring the young people to realize that, you know, you can have a life. It doesn't mean that you don't go on summer vacations with your family when you're a superintendent. There's no reason why you can't.
Right.
And I think that's a good way to mentor people too, because if you leave for 2 weeks in July, they're making some decisions, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
Makes them stronger in the end.
and talk about growth, you know, when you're calling all the shots. You know, so it's been good. And I think, you know, again, speaking about the management team, we had a meeting last year and the owner said, you know, you guys have to figure out how to keep it under 40 hours a week. You know, we don't want to see burnout. You know, you have a life, and you know, get a strong team one or a strong team two underneath you, and everyone, you know, rows in the same direction and shares the load. And so it's I'd say we've had a good philosophy here for a long time, but I've really seen some positive things in the last year.
So talk about your team a little bit. What are the numbers? What do you do for assistants? How do you rotate, you know, your weekly schedules? Because that's a tough balance. Like you said, you're year round. We're going to talk about weather here in a minute, but how is your team structured, and how many do you normally keep winter and summer, or do the numbers not fluctuate much for you?
No, they fluctuate quite a bit.
Yeah.
I would say that we're roughly 26, let's say 24 to 28 on any
Okay.
given year, depending on the availability of strong personnel. My immediate assistant, Paul Davey, who's been with me for 18 years,
Yeah.
he pretty much manages the crew now. I sent out an email on Saturdays or Sundays with a vision of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're applying for products on the golf course and why. So, you know, everyone right down to the person raking bunkers understands what's going on. And I think that's been a really good way to communicate with the staff. We still meet as a group in the morning. Then I've got a group of 4 assistants. We used to call them assistants in training, but I think they've become more than that. The assistant that's right under Paul, Chris Chuli, he pretty much works Monday to Friday, and then he will cover the occasional weekend. And these other assistants, we've put them either on a Tuesday to Saturday shift or a Sunday to Thursday shift.
Okay. Sure.
So pretty much everyone, even in the peak season, gets 2 days off a week. There'll be times when there's heavy vacation load in July and August where some of us will pick up that 6th day just to help out. But, you know, that's usually on the tail end of coming back from our own vacation. So
Sure.
it works out really well. We've got a horticulture team, and we're still trying to build that to be a larger team. We've got 2 full-time horticulturalists and then a support group under them. But we can talk about it later. But horticulture is such an identifying characteristic of this property with some of the unique things that we do. And then we've got just one mechanic, and Bev does a great job for us. And very rarely is stuff down, and if it is, it's not down for long.
Yeah.
And the ownership every year puts a good chunk of capital back into equipment, so we don't have much that's old.
Right.
But with that being said, our fairway mowers are over 10 years old, but to replace them now, you know, you're hearing quotes of 150, if you can get them, you're hearing quotes of 150,000. So we're in no rush with those pieces of equipment. But getting back to the team, and then because the University of Victoria is right here, we generally get a feed off of a bunch of great university students, and which, you know, is fantastic for us. And then we rely heavily on people that have retired and then, you know, felt that they wanted to get out of the house several mornings a week. So we've got a couple of seniors that work, you know, 60 plus that work 2 8-hour days per week. They're mowing fairways or mowing rough or doing both. And then some that just do detail work, 3 or 4 hour shifts, you know, first thing in the morning, 5 to 9 kind of thing, and gets them out in the fresh air and they get their steps in. And so it's a really good balance of young and old and everything in between. And it's a great group, probably one of the strongest we've ever had.
I think that's the shift that I've seen even in the last 5 years, but certainly even longer than that, you know, anytime someone asked me how many people I had on my staff, you had to put it in the context of full-time equivalent, because you have to be so flexible with people's schedules. Maybe they're working a second job. Like you said, maybe they're retired folks that only want to work a few days a week, which is great. And you'll take them for one day, but there might be 40 names on a roster when you're really only running 25 full-time equivalent. But that flexibility, it's probably been longer than 10 years, but that flexibility is really the key to success with when I talk to superintendents. The ones that say, nope, I'm only hiring 40-hour people, it's a challenge for them, because they're not available to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a
So,
7-day a week operation. So
absolutely.
you need the staff, that's for sure. I think we're between 18 and 20 full-time equivalents
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Okay.
summertime. And then we drop down all the students, and the seniors, for the most part, they take the winters off. In the wintertime, we'd be probably 14 to 16.
Okay. Okay.
And this would be the first year we hired an arborist too, I should mention that. And that's just been fantastic. Again, just trying to properly take this golf course into maturity. Maintaining your tree inventory is such a critical thing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's even the ones that you planted during construction, they're they're getting to the point where they need some care, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. I can still remember the first time I came to the island. I think I did a presentation for Sharpie with Brett Young, and stepped out onto the curb in at the airport and saw palm trees. And I thought I had been dropped off at a different place. It's a funny, unexpected place for weather, isn't it? In fact, don't you have some banana trees sitting out in front of the clubhouse?
Yeah, and they do well. They die right back to the ground every year.
Oh, they
But
do.
they go to 15 feet.
Yeah.
And we have to split them every 2 years, because they thrive. They get huge. And yeah, and that was probably the biggest reason my diploma from Olds College was in ornamental horticulture, majoring in turf. And
Okay.
so I've always been very keen about trees and plant material. So that was the dream, to come here and take a piece of agricultural land and plant it up, and then to see the horticulture diversity. It's, with the zone that we're in,
Right.
there's not too much. We did actually this year. You've probably heard that in the interior of BC, it's a thriving wine region, but boy,
Right.
did they get this year. They lost a lot of grapes, and
Yeah.
so we lost some stuff that had been here for 30 years, but hopefully that's a one-off, and it doesn't become the norm. They call it global warming, but you're seeing these extremes both directions, extreme cold.
So were the losses from the spring frost or the early fall, you
No,
think?
it was right in the dead of winter. We had some fairly mild wet weather, so things were pretty, I'll call it supple, for lack of a better term, pretty
Right.
soft.
Right.
And then we got into not only the temperatures, but the wind chill. It
The
was
early January one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that real severe wind chill, and a lot of I can't tell you how many water lines froze in the city. Like, it was just extreme.
Interesting. Interesting. So typically, do you get a little bit of snow, or not very much?
We usually bank on being closed for 2 weeks per year. There's
Okay.
usually a snow event. I think the biggest one was back in, I want to say 96, where we had close to 4 feet. It came in, and it was wet, heavy snow. We were stranded in our house because there's maybe one snowplow in the city of Victoria.
Right. Right.
But
Well, you're so close to Seattle. I don't think you really realize the way the island sits. It's very, very close. It's probably closer on latitude to the Seattle area than it is to Vancouver proper, isn't it?
yeah, I would say it's pretty close. That's for
Yeah.
sure. It's a 20-minute flight.
Right.
So
Right.
it's so I would say, if people ask about our climate, if they're from the States, I say, if you know Seattle's climate, I would say we're pretty darn similar.
But maybe a little bit more protected just by the fact that you've got ocean surrounding you, right?
Definitely. So the ocean here is about 100 meters from our east property line, and so it's our moderator in temperature. We get cool nights in the winter, so we, not what places like Ontario would experience. We'll go down to 15 degrees and overnight, Celsius, I should say, 60.
Right.
And then in the winter time, that cloud cover is what sails us. Our nighttime lows are 10 Celsius, which again would be 50 degrees. So it's that ocean being so close to it is our moderator.
Yeah. How much rainfall annually?
Around 30 inches per year.
Okay. Not as much as I thought.
It's not uncommon for us to go 4 or 5 months in the summer with barely an inch. So it's most of our rainfall is from about now.
Yeah.
So the beginning of October till end of March. And then it gets very dry.
So we talked last time we had lunch together. We talked about the new program, and I can't remember where you saw it, but it harkened back to when I was a kid, and I think I told you the story about the little AstroTurf solution. But you do something like that in the wintertime because there is so much rain and there's no growth, and your fairways are colonial bent grass.
Yeah, Highland Colonial.
Okay. And so you've adapted a new survival mechanism, if you will. Talk about that.
Well, and it sort of goes hand in hand with COVID, because when people couldn't travel, like I'd say our golf course historically over 30 some years always comes out of the winter beat to death.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
there's some tight areas between greens and bunkers that get just trampled to death. Divots don't recover. I'd say we don't mow fairways for 4 months, so there's no growth, no recovery.
right.
If the golfers do replace their divots, and we can talk about birds later, but crows, seagulls, flickers, you name it, they flick the divots to get at the earthworms or the crane fly larvae that are under the divots.
Right.
So we can go out in the morning and there'll be 150 divots on some of our holes where people are hitting 8 irons to wedges in, and all the divots are just laying right beside the divot because the birds have gone through. And it's an army of birds every morning. You see their footprints in the dew. In the dew. It's pretty cool.
Interesting.
So we were playing golf. Our pro Jim Goddard takes a group of members down to the UK, Spain, or somewhere like that pretty much every winter. And I went on a trip with them about 6 years ago, and our last round was at Royal County Downs, and it was mid-October. And from October 1st, they have a lot of marked off areas that you can only hit from mats, or you can move it out of there. And they're all collection areas where so many balls end up by the end of the winter, there'd be no turf. So beginning in October, they'd have a fairway mat program. So Jim found a really strong, a really good quality fairway mat from the UK, and we've started bringing those in. And for 3 winters now, we're mandatory mats from around Remembrance Day through to the spring. And it's, our fairways now, instead of looking like landmines in the spring, are mint and perfect and flawless going into our busy season. So that's been a great program, and I'd say 90% of the golfers embrace it. Instead of, especially when we get wet, when you take out a divot, you get splatter everywhere and mud, and you've got a consistent, firm mat. You can spin the ball back. It's great. And a lot of the members, we offer them complimentary at the first tee, and then there's a place to drop them off after the 9th green or the 18th, depending on whether they're playing 9 or 18 holes. But a lot of the members just bought their own. They just wanted the mat.
So I'm thinking of like a driving range mat, but it's a portable thing that they'll take with them in the round.
Yeah, I would say they're about a foot long by about 4 inches wide, and you see them line it up with their targets. So
just a big beaver pelt of a divot.
A lot of the scores improve in the winter because they're hitting from a firm surface, and they can stop the ball. And pretty hard to back up a ball when you're hitting from a mushy lie.
That's a great adaptation for a climate like yours where you don't have any growth. And you said 90% participation. I mean, for me, with even with ropes, if I could get 50%, that was a complete victory, because you've eliminated that much traffic. So that's the truth. Yeah, that's really interesting. When you said that really perked my interest. So you mentioned birds, and I wanted to kind of dwell on this for a little while, because one of the things that in fact, the border agent, when I came up for the CGSA conference a couple of weeks ago, asked me why I was going to a conference in Canada, and I said because the turf managers are more astute because you don't have as many chemical tools, if you will. In fact, I think one of the staples, am I correct in saying that Daconil may be on the block, on the chopping block?
I think it's limited use now, and
Okay.
we'll likely lose chlorothalonil. It wouldn't surprise me. We've lost so many chemistries that it would be probably likely the next one on the chopping block.
Yeah. I think as a rule, you've had to adapt and use maybe some other tools or some scouting methods. And one thing you said, because I think the crane fly egg laying season was going on when I was up there, and as it is here. And you said, "Oh, there's plenty of crows. It'll manage itself." So, talk about some of the alternatives, because you've been around long enough that you were in an era where you probably had a lot more chemical tools, and now you've had fewer and fewer, and yet, the conditions on the golf courses don't seem to have changed a whole lot. You've figured out ways around it. So how do you manage some? Because I know dollar spot's a big issue for you. Um, Certainly the crane fly larva. I don't know if do you have any chemical tools to manage them?
No, this segues exactly into, like, it allows me to share my philosophy.
Yeah.
I was on the board with the Canadian Golf Course Superintendents in the 90s, and one of my portfolios at the time was the environment. So at that time I said, well, we should, probably lead by example. If you're going to tell the membership that they should be working towards, these environmental initiatives, you should probably, lead by example. So
Sure.
we work towards certification with the Audubon Society, and we've been a sanctuary for, I think we're on our 7th recertification.
Okay.
And one of the things we conscientiously made an effort to do is in 1996, we have not used an insecticide on the property. So that's a long time.
It is.
We're getting close to 30 years, and it took a few years where we'd lose a bit of grass. Probably our biggest turf damage is when raccoons dig up bunker faces looking for grubs or finding grubs.
Right.
But other than that, we have not lost turf to any insect populations, because as soon as you don't interfere with Mother Nature, it takes care of itself. And I'll use you a perfect example of that. Is there is a predator wasp that will lay eggs on caterpillars in trees, and that egg hatches, and the larvae eat the caterpillar from the inside out. So we find all these nests over the golf course. They're dried up. They never spread. So if you attack an insect with a pesticide, you're likely taking out the predator that would naturally keep those populations in check. And everything's in a cycle.
Sure.
So there'll be years where there's more crane fly than others, or whatnot. But we just see birds flourish, bats everywhere. We've got just an ecosystem, and we can touch on that. I think our most important responsibility as a superintendent or a team that manages a golf course, other than providing good playing conditions, the number one important thing, our job, our responsibility, is to nurture an ecosystem, so that Mother Nature is in balance, and the property becomes easier to take care of. So we've the birdies of the bay, we call it. We have a poster on the back of our driving range. We have 103 species of birds that spend time here at some point. A lot of the birds are migratory.
Sure.
So it's kind of neat. We have a little threefold brochures that visitors can pick up at the pro shop that have pictures of and the names of all the birds. So when they're golfing, if they see an interesting bird, they can look at their brochure and
check it off the list.
And so we an example of nurturing an ecosystem. We've got a lot of water bodies on our golf course, and we used to use herbicides in the ponds. And again, we stopped that about the same time period. And because I haven't used an insecticide, or pardon me, bug spray or mosquito repellent in my career working here for 34 years, because the ecosystem's in balance. In the summertime, you'll see tens of thousands of dragonflies throughout the property, probably 5 or 6 different species. And those dragonflies are laying their egg bands right on the surface of the water, and cattails and reeds and different things. 80% of that dragonfly's life cycle is aquatic. And
Right.
so they're mowing through a lot of nasty bugs, including mosquito larvae. And then when they emerge, they're just voracious eaters of all those little bugs that none of us like. So, you know, so we were working on trying to attract purple martins to the golf course. They've been endangered for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They mostly only nest over salt water, so you'll see their boxes on marinas and piers and things like that.
Okay.
It took us probably 10 years to finally attract them. And we had one mating couple showed up about 8 years ago, and managed to have a clutch of 5. And the federal government was so excited, they actually sent a team down to ban these birds,
Hmm.
which was cool. And this year, I think we had 8 nesting martins, like 8 pair. And so probably 40 martins moved out of here this year, like new offspring moved out of here. And it's the neatest thing, Kevin. Like, I don't think people realize when they're golfing the energy that birds bring to a property.
Yeah.
So we've got swallows and we've got martins. And when they show up in the spring, it's like whether it's April 13th or April 21st, to me, that's the true, and I think they migrate down to South America or something. Like, it's a long journey. And they
Yeah.
show up in the spring and you see them feeding and busy, you know, building their nests in the nest boxes, and then they're feeding the young, you know, for their couple of months, and then they're gone. Like, so this year,
Huh.
it's almost eerie when they leave. It was around September 3rd. Kind of worries me that we're going to have an early fall, because around September 3rd, all of a sudden they're just gone. There's not one anywhere to be found. So it was really interesting. But, you know, it's just, again, one of those quirky little things that you eventually see and acknowledge when you've been on a property for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. But it takes observation, and it takes some discipline to be able to, like you said, sit back and let nature take its course. You know, and I think that's one thing in the States, that maybe we have too many tools, and so we can't ever just sit back and let things happen the way they were intended to happen. So everyone and everything on that property has a job. So what responsibility do the purple martins bear?
Well, it's interesting because when we have a couple of members that are, you know, they're birders, for lack of a better word, and you know, they're the people that are walking around lakes with binoculars and get excited when they see an owl or something different.
Right.
And I would say, you know, they helped us attract the purple martins. And I said, you know, why did they come? Why did we finally get them? And they said one of their favorite food sources is the dragonflies.
Mm.
So, you know, they're eating my favorite insect, so I shouldn't love them, but I do, you
Yeah.
know. So
Circle of life.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And you know, as long as we're not interfering with the life cycle of the dragonflies, there's more than enough to go around.
Any issues with larger species or predators on the property? I mean, you do have an awful lot of open space within that golf course and within that property. I would assume there's some things that kind of come and go seasonally that cause you some angst.
Well, we have ospreys. We haven't been able to, we've built an osprey platform, but we haven't been able to get them to nest here yet, but
Okay.
it'll happen one day.
Yeah.
So we stock our ponds with rainbow trout every year, and, you know, in an attempt to attract them and herons and, you know, different fishing birds. We've got a couple of nesting pair of eagles that have been on the property for a long time, I'd say a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Red-tailed hawks. You know, so an interesting story about the martins. It was not this year, but last year in the fall, I was kind of getting to be that early September, and I knew that it wouldn't be long in the martins. Well, maybe they were along a little longer than normal. And I was on the 17th green. You'll remember that green. It's by our largest pond where all those nest box are.
Right.
And I saw this one martin. He was kind of like doing a flight, but he wasn't strong enough. So he landed in the water and he was trying to paddle his way with his wings to shore. And this eagle came down and snapped it up. And the next day, the martins were gone. So I think they were waiting for that last little guy to run to the litter, so to speak, to be strong enough to make that migratory flight.
Mm-hmm.
And Mother Nature again took care of it. So, you know, those predator birds, they're here to be part of an ecosystem, make sure the rabbit populations don't get too large,
Right.
would be another example.
Yeah. Yeah.
We see fur on fairways often.
Interesting. Let's talk about diseases, because I know, when you've got excess moisture in the wintertime and you're not mowing, so there's a lot of dew sitting around. You've mentioned several times a dollar spot is one of the things that you deal with. I would assume microdochium's the other one.
That's
How do
the
you
big one.
without all the tools, the conventional tools, how do you, I would assume you've got a similar protocol to try to, manage the system as naturally as possible. So how do you tackle that?
Well, that's a great question. There's no doubt we rely on chemistries.
Yeah.
And, the chemistries, kudos to every one of those companies, and there's too many to name, and I don't want to highlight any, but, every one of those manufacturers are bringing great tools to our tool chest, great active ingredients, really low, like mils, to the 100 meters squared. And so I think one of the mistakes I made early in my career as a superintendent is I would wait till I saw expression. Like, so mid-September, by then it's too late. Your inoculum down in the profile is the populations are so large. If you spray, you might take out 90% of the population. So as a young superintendent, I would wait too long. That was the first sin. And then the second one is quite often we would spray single chemistries. And so now I think a lot of companies are actually putting more than one chemistry in a product, which is brilliant. But if we're spraying a systemic, there's about 4 contacts that will rotate through with those systemics to make sure that we're reducing the opportunity for resistance, number one.
Sure.
And number two, just keeping the inoculum low. So that's the biggest thing. The other thing I've learned probably, and again, I'd have to give a lot of credit to our trip to Ireland and talking to the superintendent, Sarah. And when I was at Royal County Downs, I was lucky on the 18th tee, I met the superintendent, and he was using so much iron that the property was quite dark, and which was fine. But he hadn't used a fungicide or minimal fungicide use in 30 years. And he manages microdochium and through the winter months using kelp and ferrous sulfate heptahydrate.
Okay.
So we started that program when I got back. So I used to make the mistake of putting products like Alpro down in the fall, which is going to raise that pH right at the surface and that's exactly where the pathogens love that higher pH. So we would trigger an outbreak by some of those bad applications. Whereas now we put down the iron in the fall, and that's a product that we use through the winter months to make sure that and the interesting thing, so we've almost eliminated microdochium and dollar spot through the fall and all winter just with iron applications. But the thing that we really noticed is wherever we miss, we have a GPS sprayer, and say if it was an area where maybe through mowing your cleanup pass on fairways, maybe the fairways 2 feet wider in one area.
Sure.
Well, in that area, the area was covered with earthworm cast because it wasn't receiving the iron. So we call it our microdochium and our earthworm suppression program. And we'll usually throw a little bit of Epsom salts in there. So we're transitioning now to, and that starts kind of early September, where it's iron, Epsom salts, and kelp, and the health of the fairways is unbelievable. And earthworms are minimal.
Okay.
Earthworm cast, because it's a big problem in a damp climate. And so so I'd say those are the 2 things. We definitely rely on chemistry. We like to make sure there's a systemic with a contact, and we get ahead of it. We make sure that we never allow the bank of inoculum to be overwhelming or to be high.
So if we're talking alternatives, I'm curious on the iron sulfate. Is that a biweekly application or more frequent than that?
At this time of year where we still have growth, it's biweekly.
Okay.
When we get down to where there'll be no growth, temperatures are cooler, so the dews aren't quite as aren't quite as heavy, then
Okay.
it might be every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks.
At what kind of rates?
We're going, I think it's, don't quote me on this, I think it's 100 grams per 100 meters squared, but we'll basically use 3 bags of ferrous sulfate heptahydrate and Epsom salts over 20 acres or 21 acres of fairway.
So it's not,
it's a couple $100s, Kevin.
yeah, it's not some huge sledgehammer of a rate that you're
and I don't
nuking
have
everything.
to tell you how good the fairways look.
Yeah, no,
When you're using that Epsom salts and the iron, the colors, fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's interesting to me to listen, and I've been critical, I guess, of some of our management approaches, I guess, in the States, because we have so many tools. We're maybe not as in tuned in a lot of cases as you're forced to be. But with water conservation in particular, and that's kind of a thing that's really important to me. Unfortunately, I feel as though in a lot of places, in the state of Idaho, I managed golf for 25 years and never once was asked for how much water I used. And the vast majority of this state is desert. So at some point, and we found out this year that water is going to be a very significant concern. But my pessimistic side says that unless we're legislated into some kind of a conservation or restriction, it's not going to happen. And I love to talk to Canadian superintendents because they've had that maybe foisted upon them, that they've had to look at things differently. But every time you and I talk, it's inspiring because you had that mindset to begin with. Now, as the tools go away, that just makes you more in tune with how nature was supposed to bring that balance to the golf course. And of course, the huge luxury for you is just being on that property so long that you can feel it and hear it and see it every day, and what's going to happen, and kind of that, instead of hitting the panic button, well, no, this time of year this happens, and we'll let the crows take care of it this week.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to not overwater. I think that's, it's just one of those things. And I think we've come a long ways. We bought the new Cirrus Pro software this year, and we've been a Rainbird course since day one. And what a invaluable tool. It's fantastic. I think we're 6 million gallons less this year than a year ago.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
And part of that's because we had some earlier rains this year that were fantastic. We basically shut off the system September long weekend, and every time we start to get a bit dry, we've got a shower, and that never happens here. So it's been a good year. So can't give all the credit, but it's just another tool. And I'd say that's the thing that I've noticed the most in 40 years in the business is the tools, the new tools that industry are bringing to the table to make allow us to do a better job. It's unbelievable.
It is. It really is.
We'll get right to what you're doing at EarthWorks and Redox with the soluble carbon products, and we're using a quarter of the nutrition that we did when I was a young superintendent. Yeah,
it's very true. It's a plant health thing that I think it just makes everything that you're trying to do so much easier if you've got good plant health to start with, and that's really what we focused on. You're right. Okay, so we talk. You're segueing perfectly into the next conversations, but and I think you're 100% right. The tools that we've seen in the last 10 years, and man, oh man, some of the stuff that I've had the privilege of previewing, I guess, in some of the robotic mowing, and the next 10 years are super exciting. I think it's just going to be really revolutionary time, and it will fit perfectly with the mindset of the next generation of superintendent. I think that's, dinosaurs like you and I are a lot tougher to bring around to that kind of concept, but I think it's going to dovetail perfectly into how they want to manage golf courses anyway. So I'm excited. So one of the things I noticed this last trip up, you've made a significant investment both personally and on the golf course side in solar energy. And Victoria, BC isn't necessarily somewhere that you would think, oh, solar is going to be a real winner for us. But I wanted you to talk about that because you've got an array on the maintenance facility that's pretty impressive. And so talk about what when you put it in, what you've seen since you've installed.
We put it in last January. It's 175 panels on our maintenance roof.
Last January 2024?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 75 kilowatt system. And we came up with that number because we had it designed action. And the engineers wanted to see our last 2 years hydro bills, because in British Columbia, I don't know what it's like down in the States, but in British Columbia, they won't, if you over generate, they don't pay you for that hydro produced.
Okay.
So you want to build a system as close to what your needs are and not over that.
Okay.
So a 75 kilowatt system is what they came up with. It'll be interesting to see. We could probably add another 10 kilowatts to the roof if necessary. It's easy to stack a few more panels on if necessary, but it's just another thing that we're doing to try to play our part in, being environmentally responsible, reducing our carbon footprint. And again, the industry talking about that, we just bought a new trap rake that's lithium. It was out there for 4 hours yesterday raking bunkers. It did a better job than our old one, and we were only lost 1 bar out of 10 on the gauge. So unbelievable. We've got an electric clips as well. So one of our triplexes is electric, and moving forward, we want to go to electric rollers, electric walkers. I don't know that we'll ever see it in the fairway mowers and the rough mowers. I know there's companies trying.
Yeah.
But boy, they require a lot of energy to, drive a big, large rotary mower. So I'm not sure if we'll get there, or if hydrogen will be the next, the next thing for those larger pieces of equipment. I'm not sure, but it's just, we have it's in the middle of the property, bright, sunny. Like I mentioned, we get a lot of sunshine for 6 or 7 months of the year.
Right.
So it seemed like the right thing to do. And the payback is 6 to 8 years. So,
okay. So are you storing energy, or are you
no,
just
it
goes into the grid?
It goes into the grid. So when you're producing more, your meter is going backwards basically. And when you're using more, the meter is going forward.
Got it.
So it's, there's a solar company here in town, ironically, it's called Net Zero. Because that's, ideally that's what you want to be, is
That's
net
the
zero.
goal. Yeah. Interesting. So 6 to 8 years in that climate. And you're seeing something similar on your home system too, right?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm not sure. Are there some federal grants available still in Canada?
There wasn't, for our home, there was a small grant. I think it was 5,000.
Okay.
In businesses, the federal government, the big incentive is you can write off the whole asset the first year. So you can save, I think it was, I want to say between 150 and 200,000. That's a direct write-off on your income for the year. So you might save $50,000 in taxes that year. So that was one of the other reasons that it made a lot of sense.
Sure.
But the big thing is it's the payback isn't that long. 7 years is nothing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like I said, it wouldn't be the first place I would expect, but you made a comment that I had never thought about from the angle of solar, and because it's dry where we live in the summer months and typically fairly sunny, certainly is the case where I live. That's also your highest consumption months for electricity. So even though it may not be as efficient in the wintertime, your consumption is down quite a bit that time of year. I never made that connection before, but I'm trying to justify it in my own home, I guess, to get over the hump on that. All right. So the other thing I noticed, and I know you've done this for a long time, is your green waste program and your composting and what you're doing with that. Talk about the challenges, talk about what you're using that material for, and what the process is.
Thanks for asking that question, Kevin. There are no challenges to the program at all. All you need, I think what took us down that road is, understanding that compost is king. Like compost is a lovely thing, and people
Right.
spend a lot of money to buy it in a garden center. And our 14th hole, that's where we do have an area to put refuse that we can't compost, whether it's large branches or things like that. And now we're chipping those, and those are becoming part of our, I'll call it the carbon source of our, you can only have so much green grass.
Yeah.
Or, vegetable clippings going into compost before it gets too high in nitrogen and not enough carbon.
Yep.
So we produce, I would say it's not an exaggeration, 500 yards of beautiful compost every year. And it's everything from leaves to all the clippings out of the gardens to our grass clippings where we do collect them. We don't collect a lot. It's really just the greens and teas is the only clippings that we collect. Aeration cores. In fact, this year we did a special batch of compost where we have a Moreto, which is a wonderful little aerator. I call it a little macaroni core, and we had probably 15 yards of those cores, and we composted. They were within 2 days they had heated up pretty good.
Wow.
But we just mixed that with sand and a little bit of our compost from a year ago. So we had this rich top dressing material that we sprigged. We built a couple new tea boxes, and we used that mix for our tea mix. And 3 weeks, and the grass is up, and it's looking pretty darn good. So just again, Mother Nature recycling. Compost is an amazing thing. You can. It's scary how hot that stuff gets if you don't keep on top of it and mix it. But it's weed free when it gets to that temperature, and it's kind of my thing. Once a month through the winter months, I flip the compost from one bin to another, and if it's a bit too hot, I add a bit of wood chip or spark mulch to it, and it just goes by feel. I don't have a secret recipe. If it smells, add carbon.
That's an easy rule, isn't it?
If it smells like manure, add carbon.
Yeah, so it's just you're striving for a closed loop system on the property, right? And you mentioned gardens, and this is a pretty unique thing that I don't see very often, but you've got some pretty significant gardens on the property that actually source a lot of the fresh produce for the restaurant on the property, right? So how did that start, and how much of the produce that the kitchen uses comes out of there?
Well, and I should know the date, but I don't. But I would say it was about 4 to 5 years ago. I co-wrote an article with my head horticulturalist, Emily Pelche at the time, that was featured in Golf Course Management. So it was called Fairway to Table instead of Farm to Table.
Yeah.
Little play on words there. So people could probably source that if they want to look in and have a deeper picture of what we've done.
Okay.
But there was an area on the golf course that was kind of beside a tee box. It was out of the way, and we call it a theme garden. So one year we'd put millet in there, which is basically bird seed. So it was, looked beautiful in the fall. And then the next year we'd grow a pumpkin patch and see how large of pumpkins we could grow. And then, the next year we'd seed it to wildflowers. And, it was a themed garden, I would call it, about a half acre, maybe 3/4 of an acre. And then started thinking, well, this is a pretty nice area. Why don't we actually, I grew up in Alberta. I grew up with a home garden, like family garden, to help, family dig the potatoes and harvest carrots and shell peas and all those things. This is, why don't we actually, produce a viable vegetable garden? And this is one of the areas that our compost ends up in all these gardens. We now have 3 on the property, because you should rotate things like potatoes so that they don't get scab, and a few other things, or kale so that they don't get, the moths that, if you're always planting them in the same place, those pests are gonna eventually thrive in those locations. So we rotate the gardens, and it's just the chef gives us a list of things that he'd like us to. Some things are just too easy for them to buy. They're pre-washed, they're pre-cut, they make a lot of sense. But other things like the spring potatoes, and I think we plant 2 or 3 crops of those, the different fingerling, Russian red potatoes, all these different, garlic could be another one. Carrots, nothing better than carrots that were picked in the morning. It's on the feature sheet in the restaurant in the evening. kind of thing. So that program, and I have to say, one of the other reasons we expanded on that program, and again, I learned this from the owner of the golf course, Moni Jol, is that word of mouth is your best form of advertising. Don't tell
100%.
people, don't tell people how good you are. Surprise somebody with shock value when they play your golf course and they're from Calgary or from their Toronto or they're from Coeur d'Alene or wherever they are, and they go back to their clubs and say, "You wouldn't believe this. You got to play Cordova Bay. They've got these vegetable
Yep.
gardens and they've got these bird posters and they've got this and they've got that." And it just kind of expanded into and morphed into what it is now.
Yeah, it's really a neat story, and the gardens are not insignificant either. They're pretty good sized, and
Yeah,
so your team manages them, correct?
they do. And I would say, and that's become a challenge, and that's why we need to grow our horticulture department, is because I would say on a 5-day week, 2 days, the vegetable gardens and the flower program that we have here takes up 2 of 5 working days per week.
Wow.
The gardens are just full of flowers as well, because that attracts the pollinators and the different things.
Sure.
Some of the birds that will keep the insects under control in your garden. So all of the vegetable gardens are also heavily flowered, not to mention all the flowers around the clubhouse. So our hort team harvests flowers every Tuesday morning and make bouquets. There's bud vases on every restaurant table. There's bouquets, washrooms, bouquets, pro shop counter on both. We've got the 9-hole course that we haven't talked about, but that's across the street. So,
Right.
And what that's done, interesting enough, Kevin, is there's an investment in time, but the flower beds have become more beautiful by far. They never get leggy. It's like pruning a hedge that's just this dense, beautiful, strong plant.
Yeah.
Or that, because it's a weekly harvesting, you're never deadheading
Interesting.
dahlias or zinnias or anything.
Yeah.
They're even marigolds, they use those in the bud vases, and the list goes on and on. But so I think our flower beds are unrivaled, and I think a big part of that is because of the regular harvesting.
Regular pruning. Yeah.
The flowers never get old.
Interesting.
The plants just get bushier and denser, and the stalks grow, but the plant doesn't get too tall and leggy. And
Makes sense.
some things they still have to stake and rope up because they just get large. But no,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Like Bob Ross would say, that's a happy accident, right? You didn't intend it that way, but again,
No.
observation that leads you to the solution.
Definitely.
Shoot, we could talk for hours about this stuff. This is really fun.
And we do.
I'm gonna wrap up with what I call my lightning round. And I think I warned you that you don't get any preparation on these questions, but it's just whatever pops into your head. And I'm interested in the second one because I don't know that we've talked about it, and it's a little bit different in Canada. But so my first question, and I know the answer already, but beer, wine, or other?
Wine.
Yeah. And you've got a trip coming up to
And the other is tequila.
and the other's tequila. That's perfect. What's your favorite sport outside of golf?
Hockey.
And you played for a long time.
I did. I hung them up about 5 years ago, just so they got tired of going to the rink at 10 at night.
Yeah.
But no, I'm a big NHL hockey fan, and
Okay.
the young players nowadays are shockingly good.
It's amazing.
It's so
amazing.
fun to watch. It's unbelievable.
So outside of work, what's your favorite pastime or hobby? Better not say wine, because people might start to question your
Anything related to exercise outdoors.
Yeah.
Whether it's kayaking or hiking. And on Vancouver Island, there's so many beautiful 15 minutes from here, you can hike through a forest that's got 8-foot wide Douglas fir trees and cedar trees. And so anything outdoors, biking, hiking,
Awesome.
you name it.
Yeah. It is an amazing place. There's so much to see there, and it's pretty incredible. Okay, so this one I'm curious. Bent grass or POA?
POA.
Okay. Without question, you didn't hesitate at all on that one.
No, and I've got a number of reasons. I find in this wet climate, the bent just doesn't handle the traffic, especially in the winter months.
Yeah.
And it ball marks up terribly.
Right.
the POA's just got a better mat, and especially, you know, if you go down into Seattle, where again, I talk about, you know, these jewels, these 100-year-plus golf courses
Mhm.
where those POAs get finer, and we, you know, we try to shorten, you know, we took the heights down about 20 years ago, and, you know, Brian at Uplands, he's the master. He's got the best POA greens on the
Yeah.
island for sure. And you cut them tight and they just become over time phenotypes. They become
Mhm.
thinner and finer, and, you know, you almost can't hurt them. The
Right.
only way I ever hurt POA greens is we rolled them on a frosty morning when we should have stayed off them. We thought they were okay, and a couple of greens that were maybe a bit frosty, we set them back. But they are, you know, don't want to overuse the term, but bulletproof. You know,
Yeah.
they're just strong. Like
Yeah.
90,000 rounds,
Amazing.
low oxygen levels in the winter months in the soil profile. Like they're saturated
Low
and
light.
low light,
Yep.
and they just, you know, back when we were bent in the original days, Pencross greens, and we fought Pythium in the spring. Just and it, you could, you have 150 rounds in the winter, and you could see a donut around every hole.
Yeah.
They just couldn't handle the winter traffic, and the POA in this climate. You're not Phoenix. You're not. You know, I'm not talking about anywhere else, but in the
Or Alberta, maybe even, right?
Yeah.
You might answer differently in Alberta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest, POA is king,
Yep.
in just my humble opinion.
I would agree with you. Favorite vacation spot, or as you would say, holiday spot. Where's
Oh.
if you could go and just live, where would you go?
Well, you got to give me two.
Okay.
There's a winter and a summer.
Yep. Fair enough.
Okay. So winter, I love Maui. I love snorkeling. I love Hawaii, not necessarily Maui per se, but
Yeah.
you know, that's attainable to go often. You know,
Sure.
obviously New Zealand, Australia is beautiful, but you know, not at this stage of my life anyways. Am I going to go there every year? And then Hornby Island, our families, I think missed 2 years and 34 years going to Hornby Island. It's a lovely little island, about 3 hours north of here, and it's my happy place.
Okay. Hornby Island. I'll have to put it on my list. Well, those were good. Those are good answers. I appreciate it. And we've kind of come to we're an hour already. Dean Pillar, thank you so much for jumping on. It's been a long time coming. I got exactly what I wanted out of it, and hopefully it wasn't too much of a burden on your day. We had one interruption. One guy tried to knock on the window, and it kind of threw you off a little bit.
Yeah,
But
no, I wouldn't answer. I wouldn't turn around.
but thank you so much for coming on, and also thank you for, you know, just all the stuff that you've done for the industry and the environment for that matter. I think it's pretty inspiring to see, to walk your fairways and listen to how you're so in tune with that property. And I think a lot of times we don't, you know, in your case, you stop and literally smell the roses. And I think it's really important to look and listen and see what your property's telling you before you just, you know, reach for the next sledgehammer and try to control things as much as we can. So pretty inspiring, and hopefully you got another 34 years in you, but I doubt it. I'm sure there's a plan. We haven't talked about it, but
Yeah,
but thanks for coming on and sharing a little bit of Cordova Bay and what's going on. I'm sure you'll have some superintendents that want to come visit you now. So
that'd be great.
appreciate the time.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been
All
a
right.
pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.